December 1944, the Arizona desert. While thousands of soldiers fought in the Battle of the Bulge, while Europe was consumed by the final battles of the war, 25 German submariners at Papago Park POW camp, hidden among the sun-scorched hills of Arizona, were digging a tunnel. Every night, meter by meter, in absolute silence. They had no idea they were about to become part of one of World War II's most unusual stories. A story about how reality can be harsher than any plan. A story about how sometimes an escape isn't the beginning of freedom, but the beginning of understanding. Papago Park was one of hundreds of POW camps scattered across America during the war. This particular camp held a special category of prisoners. Crews from German U-boats. The elite of the Kriegsmarine. Men who, just a year earlier, had been sinking American transport ships in the Atlantic. Captain Lieutenant Jürgen Krug stood at the barrack window, looking out at the desert. He was 32 years old. He had commanded U-199 and sunk 7 Allied vessels. 2 months ago, American destroyers had destroyed his submarine off the coast of Brazil. Only 18 of the 50 crew members survived. Now he was here. In a camp where guards were outnumbered by prisoners, where they served 3 meals a day, where there was a library, a sports field, even a theater. This wasn't a prison. It felt like an insult. His fellow prisoners felt the same way. Senior Lieutenant Friedrich Gusten, the U-boat's engineer and a mathematician by training. Seaman Werner Drexler and Walter Kozur. All of them were accustomed to the cramped steel compartments of submarines, the smell of diesel fuel and unwashed bodies, the roar of depth charges. Now there was only the silence of the desert, the endless blue sky, and a thought that wouldn't let them rest. The war was continuing, and they were here, safe, while their brothers were dying. The American guards treated them strangely. Not with hatred, not even with contempt, with a kind of indifferent professionalism. Like workers at a factory. Roll call in the morning, work during the day, free time in the evening. Some prisoners began to adjust. They played cards, studied English. One even flirted with a nurse in the infirmary. But not the submariners. The submariners remembered their oath. A submariner never surrenders. One evening in July 1944, Krug gathered his men in the far corner of the barrack. He spoke just one sentence, but it changed everything. They were getting out. 7 months. 178 meters. 25 men. The plan developed gradually, like the blueprint of a complex mechanism. Friedrich Gusten, the engineer, took charge of calculations. He studied every meter of the camp's territory, measured distances by pacing, drew diagrams on scraps of paper that he later burned. Problem number 1. Where to dig from. The barracks stood on concrete platforms, too visible. The shower room? Patrols passed by every 2 hours. That left one place, the corner of the coal shed. It was located in a dead zone between 2 searchlights. Problem number 2. What to do with the dirt? 178 meters of tunnel meant tons of soil. The solution came unexpectedly. They would carry the dirt in their pockets, scatter it on the sports field during games, add it to the vegetable gardens that prisoners were allowed to maintain. Problem number 3. Tools. They had knives from the mess hall, tin cans sharpened on rocks, wooden boards from crates. That would have to be enough. Problem number 4. Where to go after the escape. And here, Krug made a fatal error. He had a map of Arizona. On it, he could see that 2 kilometers from the camp flowed the Gila River. It fed into the Colorado River. The Colorado flowed south toward Mexico. From the Mexican border there were ports on the Pacific coast. And there, perhaps, Japanese ships. The Japanese were Germany's allies. They would help them get home. The plan was insane. But what other plan could men have when they were separated from home by an ocean and a continent? In August, they began digging. Every night after the 10 o'clock roll call, they descended into the tunnel, taking turns, 2 men per shift. One dug, the other kept watch. Gustin created a ventilation system from tin cans. Air came through a camouflaged pipe on the surface. They reinforced the tunnel walls with boards from crates. The tunnel itself was 60 centimeters wide, 80 centimeters high. They had to crawl. The earth was hard. Clay mixed with stones. Their hands developed calluses that burst and bled. They wrapped their fingers in rags. Night after night, meter after meter. Some began to have doubts. Seaman Kazur asked what if the war was already ending? What if Germany was losing? Krug cut him off sharply. Germany would never surrender. The Führer had promised miracle weapons, new rockets, new submarines. They had to return. Their comrades were fighting while they were here, growing fat on American rations. But Kazur wasn't alone. The longer the work continued, the more prisoners began asking questions. The Americans noticed nothing. Or did they pretend not to notice? This question would haunt Krug for years after the war. September. October. November. The tunnel grew. 50 meters. 100. 150. Gustin made calculations by the stars. He had been a navigator. Counted steps. Measured angles. They needed to emerge outside the camp perimeter, but not too far. The ideal point was beyond a hill, 300 meters from the guard tower. December 22nd, 1944. The tunnel was complete. 178 meters. 7 months of work. Krug assembled his men one last time. Tomorrow night. Christmas Eve. The guards would be relaxed. They were all leaving together. 25 men. Each had a makeshift backpack made from sacks, canned food, water in bottles, a compass made from melted gramophone records, and a magnetized needle. They were ready. But they had no idea what awaited them outside. December 23rd, 1944. 10:15 p.m. Roll call was finished. The guards made their rounds of the barracks and dispersed to their posts. In barrack number 7, the lights went out. Silence. 11 p.m. Krug gave the signal. One by one, 25 men descended into the tunnel. Krug went last. Behind him, he slid the camouflaged hatch back into place. They crawled in darkness. One after another. Only the sound of breathing and the rustle of clothing against the tunnel walls. 178 meters of crawling felt like an eternity. 11:40 p.m. The first man reached the end of the tunnel. He pushed up the wooden cover. Cool night air rushed in. Stars. Freedom. They emerged one by one. Lay in the sand, breathing heavily. Looked around. The camp towers with searchlights were over there. A kilometer away. They were free. Krug checked the compass. Pointed toward the river. They moved quickly but quietly. They walked 2 kilometers. Stumbled in the darkness over rocks and cacti. Krug led. Gustin brought up the rear. And there it was. The valley of the Gila River. They descended the slope. Gustin was the first to reach the bottom. And he froze. There was no water. Krug came down. Looked. Couldn't believe his eyes. The river had dried up. Not a shallow stream. Not low water. Nothing. Just a dry riverbed. Cracked earth and stones. Krug whispered that this was impossible. The map showed a river here. Gustin remained silent. The others arrived one by one. Looked. Said nothing. The map Krug had studied was made in spring. The Gila River in Arizona is seasonal. In winter it dries up. Any local resident would know this. But Krug wasn't a local resident. He was a submariner from Hamburg. How could he know about Arizona deserts? 7 months of work. 25 men, 178 meters of tunnel. To discover there was no water. Drexler asked what they should do next. Krug was silent. For the first time during his entire captivity, he didn't know what to say. Gustin unfolded the map. The Colorado was 80 kilometers to the west. The Mexican border was 300 kilometers to the south. On foot, through the desert, with no roads. They had water for 3 days. Food for a week. 300 kilometers in a week? Through the desert? Krug made a decision. They would split up into small groups, 2 or 3 people each. That way there was less chance they'd all be caught. They'd meet in Mexico, in the town of Sasabe at the border. They shook hands. 25 men dispersed in different directions, into the darkness of the desert. Christmas night, 1944. What they hadn't accounted for is that temperatures in the Arizona desert dropped to freezing at night. During the day, they rose to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Every rock was scorching hot during the day. No shade, no water, just endless space where every hill looked like the previous one. Krug walked with Guston and 2 other seamen. The first night they covered 20 kilometers. They hid during the day behind rocks. The water ran out on the second day. On the third day, one of the seamen started becoming delirious. He saw water. The ocean. It was a mirage. Guston grabbed him, but the seaman broke free and ran toward the mirage. He fell. They picked him up, dragged him further. Fourth day. Their lips cracked. Tongues swelled. Every step required an effort of will. Krug understood. They wouldn't make it. Not to Mexico. Maybe not to the next morning. At night they saw farm lights, far away, on the horizon. Guston suggested asking for water. Krug objected. They'd be turned in immediately. Guston replied simply, they would die here anyway. Krug looked at his men. At the seaman who could barely walk. At Guston, whose lips were bleeding. He agreed. They went to the farm. They knocked on the door at dawn. A farmer opened it, a man about 50 years old in work clothes. He looked at them, at their torn uniforms, at their faces, blackened by the sun, at their desperate eyes. The farmer said they looked terrible. Krug tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't obey. Gusson said in English the only word that mattered, water. The farmer disappeared into the house, returned with a pitcher. They drank greedily, choking. The farmer asked if they were the Germans from Papago. They didn't answer, but silence was an answer. The farmer sighed, asked them to wait. 20 minutes later, the sheriff arrived. The escape was over. December 24th, morning. Papago Park Camp. Morning roll call. A guard called out names. One by one, prisoners answered, but 25 men remained silent. Panic, sirens, search of the barracks. Then they found the tunnel. The camp commander, Colonel William Holden, stood at the tunnel entrance in disbelief. 178 meters, 7 months. How could they not have noticed? The most extensive manhunt for escaped POWs in U.S. history began. Every police station in Arizona, New Mexico, and California was alerted. Army patrols combed the desert. The sheriff announced a reward. Local residents organized search parties. Radio broadcasts carried descriptions. 25 German prisoners of war. Dangerous. If seen, report immediately to police. But the Germans weren't dangerous. They were dying of thirst. Group number 1, 3 seamen, surrendered on the second day. They came out to a highway and flagged down a passing car. The driver took them straight to the police. Group number 2, 5 men, hid in a cave. On the 4th day, a farmer with dogs found them. They were too weak to run. Group number 3, Drexler and 2 others, got the farthest. They headed south toward the border. They covered 100 kilometers. Almost at Mexico, they were stopped by a border patrol. They didn't resist. But one man reached his goal. Senior Lieutenant Hans Werner Kraus, 34 years old, navigator, a loner by nature. He walked alone, didn't sleep at night. During the day, he hid and slept in 2-hour intervals. Navigated by the stars, drank dew from rocks at dawn, ate lizards. He covered 280 kilometers in 12 days. On the 12th day, he saw Mexico. Across the valley, a border marker. 300 meters, just 300 meters. He waited for nightfall, crawled the last meters, touched the post. Mexico. Freedom. He stood up, took a step, another. laughed. Then a searchlight flared. The American Border Patrol ordered him to freeze. Kraus stood still, didn't move. Looked at the post at his feet. He'd walked 300 meters, 300 kilometers, 12 days. They ordered him to raise his hands. He slowly raised his hands. The last fugitive was captured on January 6, 1945. The escape was over. They were returned to Papago Park. All 25. Exhausted. Sunburned. Some had to be carried on stretchers. They were placed in solitary confinement for 30 days, bread and water, individual cells. But strangely, the guards treated them with a kind of respect. American soldiers came to look at the tunnel, shook their heads. One of them said, "Crazy, but you have to admire their determination." Krug sat in confinement and thought, 7 months of work, 25 lives at risk. All for what? To die in the desert? No. Not die. They didn't die. The Americans saved them, gave them water, fed them, treated them, returned them to warm barracks. They had escaped from a camp where they were fed 3 meals a day, to die of thirst in the desert. And then the Americans saved them. Again. The irony was unbearable. 2 weeks later, a guard brought him a newspaper. The headline read, "Soviet troops enter Germany. Berlin prepares for siege." Krug read it. Reread it. The newspaper fell from his hands. The war was lost. They had dug a tunnel to return home and continue fighting. But there was no home left. Germany was dying, and they were here. Safe. While their cities were being bombed, their families were starving, their country was collapsing. And suddenly Krug understood something strange. He and his men were the lucky ones. They hadn't died under depth charges in the Atlantic, hadn't burned in flaming oil, hadn't frozen in icy water. They were here, alive, whole. While their comrades in arms were dying in the final meaningless battles of the war, they were safe. They had tried to escape from paradise, because they didn't want to admit it was paradise. May 8, 1945. Germany capitulated. At Papago Park, they announced the end of the war. Some prisoners cried. Some were silent. Some didn't believe it. Krug stood at the barrack window, looking at the desert. The same desert that had nearly killed him. Guston approached him, asked what they would do now. Krug was silent for a long time. Then he answered. They would go home and rebuild. What else was there to do? Repatriation began in 1946. Krug and his men were sent to a destroyed Germany. They returned to a country they didn't recognize. Ruins. Hunger. Occupation. Many of them eventually returned to America. Not as prisoners, but as immigrants. Today, the site of Papago Park Camp is an ordinary park in suburban Phoenix. A memorial plaque tells the story of the tunnel. Sometimes tourists come, take photographs. Local residents joke. The longest tunnel that led nowhere. But that's not true. The tunnel led somewhere. It led 25 men to an understanding. An understanding that wars end. That dreams die in the desert. That sometimes the only way to find freedom is to stop running from it. The story of the Great Escape from Papago Park isn't a story about heroism. And it's not a story about foolishness. It's a story about men who dug a tunnel out of one prison and discovered that outside was a bigger prison. A desert the size of a continent. A war the size of the planet. An illusion the size of a life. Sometimes, the longest path to freedom is the path to accepting where you already are. Sometimes, an escape is just a journey back.